Hey Dean, back to Sear Performance. Working on Lynn's 33, just kind of a quick update video. We're still waiting on parts and stuff, so we're just kind of trying to do a few little things in between some other projects on his car to get it further along. So let's take a look real quick. So what I did was, so far today, basically, I took that fuel filter that was hanging on the frame there off, and I pulled all of the old rubber line all the way back out, and I fed a new dash 6 braided line all along because the frame is channeled, or not channeled, it's boxed um, in sections along the way, so I didn't want to have to try and chase it through the frame, so I just put a little barb, like a double-ended barb, and there's the end of the line there, and I already have the straight fitting on it. And then what I did was I pulled the fuel tank out and took the pump and a bunch of the wiring just kind of hanging down there, but the pump is out of it. I'm going to move the pump because I did see that the rear end is actually, whenever the suspension collapses or compresses, it actually smacks into the pump pretty good. So I'm going to relocate the pump probably somewhere on this bracket here, maybe somewhere along in there, standing up and down, and that way my fittings will be, horizontal, and I have, so, oh, you know, I took the tank and I took the sending unit out. It's really, really small in this tank. Kind of your standard, aftermarket sending unit. So it's really, really small, but the sending unit barely fits through there. So I was trying to reconfigure and make a new plate, kind of a new sending unit in a sense. And I moved the sending unit over. See, this is the old one, and they they had this thing janked up too. But this is the top of the old one, and this is the hole where the sending unit wire comes through, like the signal wire for the fuel gauge. Then this hole here, this one, they drilled and kind of tapped for this 3/8 compression fitting, and I'll stab a couple pictures in there, but it was maybe 2 threads into this plate, and it was completely sideways. And then they had this steel tube with a compression fitting as the suction, which, that this is fine. The tube is fine for a suction tube. It is a hard line, so it won't kind of flop around down in there, but that should have been like a bulkhead compression fitting, or something with more of a, not a pipe thread, or maybe it should have just been threaded in better, and I wouldn't have noticed as much or complained about it as much, but not a big deal. So I was gonna make this one, and I welded a dash 6 onto it and then put the sending unit, but with the dash 6 there, it's kind of hard to see, but the pickup tube, would have to kind of come out and bend, and then being that that hole in the tank is so small that it would just make it really probably impossible to feed it through. So I just decided, this is probably the original tank, but it's got a bunch of dents and dings and stuff like that. So what I decided to do was just take, and I have a bunch of these weld-in fittings. I have them in steel and aluminum. I always order 2 or 3 of each. So this is a dash 6 steel weld-in fitting. So I drilled the top of the tank, stuck it in there, and TIG welded it around. Obviously I drained all the gas out of it and blew a bunch of air through it, so that it doesn't, give me a nice backfire. So I got that. The pump is over here. which I think Lynn had done these little solder joints on the wires because they had the pushes, the pushes, the female terminals, and I think what he had said is they kind of just kept falling off. They were being a pain in the butt. But this is how the pump set up in the car, you know, something like this, and you can see where the housing was. Hold on, so I can see too. You can see where the housing, the rear end housing, is actually beating on the bottom of that pump. So that's why I'm going to take the pump off and stand it up, you know, more like this along the back of that bracket. So this would be the front of the car. Plus, this is an adjustable pump, so you'll be able to actually get to it and adjust it fairly easy. And then I'll do -6 fittings in and out, and I'll have a pre-filter and a post-filter. So I'll get all that ordered, but I have enough fittings in line. And then on the fuel line, where it used to come out, you know, way up here, where the AC line comes out, it used to come out way up here, had a line that came back, and then went back to rubber. This was a metal line. Here, let me show you. I think it's through in here, yeah. So that was, whoops. This line here came into frame like this, and it was just hose clamped on. You can see there's no barb or nothing to hold that on. You know, this is just a steel tube, and then they did the same thing here. There's no barb, it's just clamped on. This is super easy to get off. So this tucked in here like this, and then I put this bend in, but it was bent over like that, and then this was wrapped over like this to the filter. Then out of the filter came out, and it had all of this. You know, it had all of this stuff on there with you know, it had the clear glass filter, which, speaking to the owner, it was kind of a sign for him that, you know, the pump was working. And then he's got a gauge there with the regulator. So, you know, all of this was hanging on the front of the motor, all these hose clamps, and, you know, it worked, and it was fine in some ways. But it's ugly, you know, and these hoses are like just so flimsy and crappy now, probably from being so old. But this big coil here is what came off the frame, out of the frame, sorry. And this was the end all the way up at the front, and you can see where that metal tube went in. I mean, they just absolutely smashed the hose, and it's almost completely broken through. Like, it doesn't take much to just kind of kink it over. And then kind of going along it, I always kind of feel the hose. It's still a little rubbery, but it is more getting toward a hard kind of plastic feeling. And then there's spots in it where it's just like gooey, where you can tell the hose was breaking down on the inside. Like right here, I'm not sure if this was, you know, getting close to the exhaust, but this is where it gets super, super hard. And then here's all these cracks, just a ton of dry rotted cracks in the hose. And then it continues on and goes, and this is where it was connected to the pump. And this entire line, the whole length, I'm not sure how well it's showing up. Let me see. Yeah, you can kind of see that it's cracked all the way. I mean, I'm already at, like, I don't know, 16 inches, you know, 18 inches, 24 inches. It goes all the way, completely, all the way around, comes down, and then it starts kind of going away right in here. Not really. Well, So let's say the entire hose is cracked, dry rotted, cracked. So this is a huge concern, especially for me, well, the owner more, because it's his car and it could be him driving down the road and the line breaks. This is the pressure side. So if this blows out, that pump, the pump's gonna blow fuel all over underneath the car, in the frame rail. It's gonna puddle up in the frame rail, blow it all over the motor. So that definitely wouldn't be good, especially with the exhaust, the headers, everything being super, super hot. There's always a chance of something catching on fire. So what I'm gonna do is, I came out back here where they went in with the wiring and the AC line. I'm gonna come out here and kind of tuck this line up into the body here. You can see back in here, there's like a bolt in here for the wooden floorboard to get bolted down to a bracket. So I'll probably try and take a P-clamp with a nut and hold the line here, and then it's a little long right now, but come up something like this. This way it stays away from the exhaust, and then yeah, I'll probably keep it just above that AC coming out of the firewall. I'll probably put a couple P-clamps, new P-clamps, and come across the back. I might keep it over here and then go up. There is a bolt there that I could possibly use for some kind of bracket. Not really sure, but I'll figure that out. I don't want to cover up the serial number. But then I'll come to here. There'll be a filter probably right here, so it's easy to get to. And you can put like a little can underneath, like a catch can. When you take it off, the fuel spills out, so it doesn't get all over the paint and stuff like that. But then on the intake, and I already switched the line on he's got dual carbs with one of the Earl's dual feeds. Well, it used to face this way. It was upside down. Not upside down, but it was the other way around. So that this barb here was facing out here, and then that's where the rubber line went down the front of the motor. So I took the barb out and I flipped the line around so it faces the back, and the firewall's somewhere roughly right around here. So either a 90, let me get the water pump out of your way here. Either a 90, that might be too far off the firewall, so a straight might work with a nice radius in it, and a clamp on the firewall to hold that radius. And you always leave a little extra. You never super tight, especially when you're attaching it to the motor. You always leave a little slack, because the motor will vibrate around, rock around, so you want the line to be able to move around so it's not tugging on stuff. But I also have a pressure gauge, and it has like a female -6 and a male -6 that I figure, for his sake, I need to tighten the gauge or turn the gauge over. Oh, I have to change the gauge actually to a low pressure gauge. But I can kind of put it right there off the dual line, and that'll give him a gauge so that he can see what the pressure's at, and that'll tell him if the pump is working. I have this liquid filled gauge laying around, so I'll swap that gauge in. Yeah, it's antique yellow, it's not old, so I'll put those in there, and then that'll, once the motor's back, that'll all go back together. But that's kind of it for now. Oh, I did do the braid on the wiring loom. I got a lot of that done. I got all the main section under here. I tried to tuck it as far as I could up on the wires that are coming out for the harness. I have these wires here that run across the top of the motor. I haven't done them yet because I don't know if I'm going to shorten them or lengthen them. The red wire I did, he did tell me that he changed from the like 2 wire you know, so this is a trigger, so I can get rid of this red one, and I can put a new terminal end on just the yellow one for the alternator, and that'll make that a little bit smaller. And then you got the temp sensor, and I believe this is the fan, which it's also on a temp signal to turn the fan on, but it goes inside to a toggle switch. So I'll just leave it that way. That's the way it is. But then I'll wrap that, but it's a million times cleaner. I did the LEDs. I took the wire off from over here that strung across. I flipped this LED around. I zip tied them back on, put them all together, heat shrink tubed the two sets of wires. There's 4 wires, but it's 2 sets of wires here. I heat shrinked them here to kind of just pinch them together. I dropped it in the rail, zip tied this one back up and in place for the most part, and then another little piece of heat shrink tube where those 3 come together. Then I put a little piece of braid on. This one under here, ties back in, then it goes down, ties into the red wire, which it's right here, and then the ground, I came out the harness there and went down and back into the harness and fed it into this main harness coming across to this side, where I now have all the wiring for the headlights. The blinkers is brought to this side here, and then this is the ground, I believe, for the MSD box. Yeah, that's the ground for the MSD box, and then this is the ground for the LEDs. So I brought them to over here, and I might change the battery cable and get a longer one to bring it up and onto the block instead of just down there. But I'll get like one of those ones, kind of like the positive one with a janky crimp, man, but where it has 2 wires coming out of the terminal, and then I can just set these 2 wires in that terminal, and that's, you know, direct to battery ground for both of those. I have to run a ground for the fuel pump because they just had it on the bolt for the bracket, and I don't like that. I got to get the heat shrink, the heat sleeve, you know, for the starter wires. This is the MSD box, so I'll have to cut and lengthen this and bring it over to the starter solenoid, and then put all of these in the heat sleeve, and that'll pretty much be it for, you know, the wiring that I'm going to kind of do. I'll probably end up putting some braided loom over these wires that go down, tucked behind everything. You know, I'll put some braided loom on the oil pressure sensor. I'll do all of that. Once the motor's back in the car and I know exactly where those wires are going, if I'm going to shorten them, lengthen them, to hide them a little better or whatever, I'll do all that. And then I just have the AC clutch wire, which I'll get rid of this big yellow crimp, and I'll put that in a nice tiny braid loom like this here, and I'll bring that up to the AC compressor, and then it goes over to the high idle circuit. It's a little stepper motor that pushes on the throttle and gives you a little extra RPM when the AC clutch engages. So I'll string that over to that, wire that in. But that's kind of it for now. A little bit slow, you know. Dang, that damn light. So kind of like I said, I'm waiting on the coil springs. Hopefully they went out. I'll get them this week. And then the motor. Once the motor gets back, they got it all apart. He's just, he needs time to look at it. So hopefully he'll get time this week and we can kind of make a decision on what's going to happen with the motor. Other than that, that's kind of it for now. Just a quick little update. So please like, subscribe, hit the bell to notify new videos coming out, and leave any comments, you know, about anything. All right, thank you.